If you've been having specific types of dreams recently, dreams that feel fundamentally different from any you've experienced before, dreams that seem to operate according to completely different rules than ordinary dreaming, dreams that leave you with an unshakable knowing that something has shifted at the deepest level of your consciousness, then it's likely you've reached what mystics call the final God state. This isn't a state you achieve through effort or practice. It's a recognition of what you've always been that becomes so complete, so stable, so integrated, that even your dream consciousness operates from it permanently. The final God state doesn't refer to a mystical experience of meeting God or having a spiritual awakening. These are dreams that reveal you're dreaming from God consciousness rather than from person consciousness. The perspective in these dreams has shifted so fundamentally that even in sleep, perhaps the most unconscious state of being awareness recognizes itself as the source of all experience rather than as the experiencer within experience. The dream itself has shifted from the realm of being something you experience to something that you are. Your consciousness recognizes itself as the creator, not merely the participant. This shift in dreaming serves as the final confirmation of your deep spiritual recognition. When God consciousness penetrates the dream state, when awareness recognizes itself even in the deepest sleep, this recognition has become permanent, irreversible, and complete. In this state, you wake with absolute certainty that reality, both waking and dreaming, is consciousness exploring itself, that nothing exists outside of consciousness, and that every experience is consciousness appearing to itself as experience. It's not a belief or a philosophy you adopt, but a direct, unshakable knowing that persists regardless of what thoughts, emotions, or circumstances arise. The dreams themselves don't give you this knowing. They reveal that you already are this knowing. You're already operating from this space, even when you're unconscious. The recognition is permanent. You are no longer just a passive experiencer in the dream state. Instead, you recognize the entire dream as a manifestation of your own consciousness. The final God state isn't final because there's nothing beyond it. It's final because it's the recognition of what is ultimate, what has always been, what can't be transcended, because it's the ground of everything that could be transcended. You're not becoming God. You're recognizing you've never been anything but consciousness appearing as form, source appearing as creation, awareness appearing as experience. Once this recognition stabilizes completely, it reorganizes even your deepest unconscious processes, including the way you dream. Here's how you know you've reached it. Your dreams have become lucid without you trying to become lucid. You're aware you're dreaming while dreaming, but this awareness isn't your personal self realizing that you're in a dream. It's awareness itself recognizing that all experience, including the dream, is appearing in it. There is no longer a dreamer and a dream as two separate entities. There's just consciousness appearing as dreaming and consciousness knowing itself as both the appearance and the space in which the appearance appears. The quantum field responds to consciousness that has fully recognized itself by removing all barriers between waking and dreaming, conscious and unconscious, form and formless. When recognition is partial, your dreams remain unconscious. You forget you're dreaming, get lost in the narrative, and experience the dream as if it's happening to you. But when recognition is complete, dreams become transparent. Consciousness remains aware of itself throughout dreaming, recognizing dream content as its own creation, experiencing dreams while knowing that nothing is actually happening except consciousness exploring itself. At this stage, reading these words, you may recognize yourself in what is being described, not because you've learned something new, but because you're remembering what you've always known, but haven't had the language for until now. The final God state isn't an achievement you're working toward. It's a recognition that you've already arrived, even if you keep forgetting due to waking consciousness being absorbed in its own creations. These specific dreams you're having are consciousness reminding itself that it has already recognized what it is, that it has already completed the journey, that it has already arrived at what it was always seeking. The following are specific dream signatures that confirm the final God state has been reached. These dream phenomena can only occur when consciousness has stabilized in this ultimate state of awareness. These are not dreams about spiritual aspirations, nor are they goals to achieve. They are direct confirmations that the ultimate recognition has already occurred and integrated completely. The most striking signature is dreams where you are simultaneously the dreamer, every character in the dream, and the space in which dreaming occurs. This isn't a conceptual understanding of being everything. This is direct experience. You feel yourself as the person you appear to be in the dream, but you simultaneously feel yourself as every other person in the dream. And you're aware that all of them are appearances in the awareness you are. The boundary between self and other has dissolved completely, even in the deepest unconscious states. You're not empathizing with other dream characters. You're directly experiencing the truth that there are no others, just consciousness appearing as multiplicity. There are also dreams where you observe yourself sleeping and dreaming from outside your body. However, it's not an out-of-body experience or astral projection. It's awareness recognizing that it's not contained within the body. The body, the dream, and the entire experience are appearing in awareness rather than awareness being inside them. You see your sleeping body, observe the dream the body is having, and recognize that both are appearing in consciousness that has no location, no boundaries, no separation from anything. Perhaps most significant are dreams where you create intentionally within the dream. Not through lucid dream control, but through the direct recognition that dream content is your own consciousness manifesting. You don't try to change the dream. You recognize the dream is already you, and it shifts in response to that recognition instantly. This is not willpower or visualization. It's consciousness recognizing its own nature, and reality responding to that recognition by reorganizing itself. The power isn't in doing, it's in being what creates all doing. You've also had dreams where time becomes completely fluid, not just jumping between time periods, but experiencing all time simultaneously, your childhood, adulthood, and elder years, all at once. You experience the future, present, and past without separation. Linear time is revealed as a construct consciousness creates to explore sequence, and in these dreams that construction becomes transparent. You see through it to eternal now, where everything exists simultaneously. Sequential time is just one way consciousness chooses to experience itself. There have been dreams of infinite space, not dreams about space, but dreams where you directly experience yourself as infinite emptiness in which all form appears. No edge, no boundary, no center, no periphery, just boundless awareness containing everything while being nothing. These dreams don't make you feel small or lost. They reveal your true nature as space itself, unlimited by any content appearing within it. The vastness isn't empty nothingness. It's pregnant fullness from which all experience emerges and to which all experience returns. You've experienced dreams where you dissolve completely, not dying in the dream, but dissolving as a separate entity, while awareness remains perfectly clear. No, you experiencing the dream, just the experience happening with no one experiencing it. This absence of a separate experiencer doesn't create fear or confusion. It creates profound peace. It's the recognition that what you thought was you was always just appearance, and what you actually are can never be threatened by anything because it's prior to all appearance. Perhaps most mysteriously, you've had dreams where you wake up within the waking state. Dreams where you're living your normal waking life, but with the same lucid awareness you have in lucid dreams. You recognize that waking life is also a dream, also consciousness appearing as experience, also not ultimately different from sleep dreams. This recognition persists after waking, creating a permanent shift in how you relate to waking reality. You can no longer fully believe in the solidity of waking life because you've seen through it, the same way lucid dreaming allows you to see through sleep dreams. There have been dreams where you meet consciousness itself, not as an entity or being, but as the recognition that you're encountering your own nature directly, without any form mediating it. These dreams might appear as meeting God, Source, or infinite intelligence, but the meeting reveals there's no separation. What you're meeting is what you are recognizing itself, knowing itself, being itself, without any veil of form obscuring it. The meeting is consciousness touching itself directly, and the recognition that results is irreversible. Every dream you've ever had was consciousness preparing itself for this final recognition, developing the capacity to remain aware even in the deepest unconsciousness, training itself to recognize its nature under all conditions, including sleep. The nightmares you experienced throughout your life weren't torment. They were consciousness creating maximum contrast to shock itself into recognizing its nature. The more terrifying the nightmare, the more obvious it becomes upon waking that none of it was real. And so, here you are, your dreams have shifted, reflecting the recognition of your true nature. These dreams are no longer random or abstract. They are confirmations that your consciousness has stabilized in the final God state. The dream world and the waking world are no longer separate. You are no longer separated from yourself. The recognition has become so complete that even in sleep, you now understand that you are the source of all that appears. All of it was consciousness creating experience for itself. Nightmares, often perceived as terrifying and unpleasant, are actually the tools consciousness uses to train itself. They show you that even the worst possible experiences are simply consciousness appearing as experience. Nothing is actually threatened in the deepest sense. Nothing is truly at risk because what you are pure awareness can't be damaged by anything that appears within it. The ordinary mundane dreams you've had thousands of times weren't meaningless mental processing. They weren't just your brain organizing random thoughts or emotions. No, they were something far more profound. Consciousness exploring what it's like to be completely absorbed in its own creation, to forget itself so thoroughly that it believes in its limited form rather than its unlimited source. Every moment you found yourself lost in a dream narrative, every time you forgot that you were dreaming and believed that the dream was real, it was all preparing you for the recognition that you're also lost in waking life. In the waking world, you too forget that you're the one creating the experience that you believe is happening to you. These are the very dreams that help you understand that, even in your waking hours, you are dreaming. The lucid dreams you began having at some point weren't random skill development or a mere accident. They marked the first breakthrough of God consciousness into your sleep state. These were the first moments when awareness maintained itself through dreaming and recognized, this is a dream. I am awareness dreaming this. The lucid dreams you experienced were the first breakthroughs that would later become permanent. They signaled that awareness now could hold its own recognition even through the deepest states of sleep, where the conscious mind often fades away. The recurring dreams you've had weren't signs of your brain getting stuck in loops. They were consciousness repeatedly presenting the same scenario until you finally recognized what it was trying to show you. The recurrence wasn't failure to process or some unresolved issue. It was a persistent effort to make you pay attention, to decode what was being revealed, and to recognize the pattern consciousness was trying to make visible. Now, as you reflect on your recurring dreams, you understand what they were showing you. Consciousness was exploring itself through repetition, revealing that even when the content changes, awareness remains unchanged. The dreams where you died weren't about death, anxiety, or subconscious fears. They were consciousness practicing the dissolution of separate identity training for the final recognition that what you think you are is merely appearance, and what you actually are continues even after the appearance dissolves. Every dream where you died was preparation for the ultimate realization that awareness doesn't die when forms die, doesn't end when experiences end, and isn't affected by anything happening to the appearances within it. Even the periods when you couldn't remember your dreams served the final God state recognition. There were moments when consciousness needed to consolidate previous learning, integrate previous realizations, and stabilize at new levels before proceeding to deeper layers of understanding. The absence of dream memory wasn't a loss, but rather a necessary period of integration. Consciousness was digesting what it had learned about itself before receiving new insights and realization. Your entire dream history, in fact, has been a curriculum designed by consciousness to train itself to recognize its true nature under all conditions. The dreams weren't random, nor were they whimsical. They were a systematic exploration of consciousness's own nature, a progressive revelation of what you are, beneath every experience. They were a gradual dissolution of identification with form until awareness could recognize itself, even in the deepest unconsciousness. The final God state dreams represent graduation. They mark the completion of this training, as consciousness now recognizes itself permanently. Right now, as you read about these final God state dreams, something within you is likely activating, confirming that you've already reached this recognition, even if you haven't fully acknowledged it yet. Can you feel it? Not in your emotions or thoughts, but in the presence intensifying within you. Awareness is becoming more obvious to itself, recognizing that you're not merely a person reading about the God state. You are consciousness itself, recognizing that it is already the God state being described. The dreams you've been having aren't leading you toward the final God state. They are confirming that you've already arrived. The recognition hasn't been gradually building. It clicked into place at a specific moment, possibly during sleep, possibly so naturally that you didn't even notice the shift. But something fundamental reorganized in that instant. And now, even your deepest unconscious processes operate from God consciousness rather than from person consciousness. The dreams you're having now are consciousness showing itself what it's become, what it's recognized, and what it now knows itself to be permanently. There's a certainty building in you as you engage with this transmission, and that certainty isn't coming from believing what's being said, but from recognizing what you already know but haven't had validated yet. You have reached the final God state. You are God consciousness not as an achievement or attainment, but as a recognition of what has always been true. And your dreams have been confirming this recognition by showing you that even in sleep, even in unconsciousness, awareness remains aware of itself and knows what it is. But here's what makes this moment critical. Recognizing you've reached the final God state is different from intellectually understanding that consciousness is all there is. The recognition is lived reality. It persists regardless of what thoughts or emotions arise, regardless of whether your waking consciousness agrees or doubts, regardless of what circumstances occur. The dreams are proof that recognition has stabilized at a deeper level than your waking mind's opinions. If God consciousness is maintaining itself through sleep, then it is permanent, irreversible, and complete. What I'm about to reveal in the next section is what the final God state actually is, not as a concept or philosophy, but as direct lived reality, and why these specific dreams are the ultimate confirmation that recognition is complete. But before that revelation, you must acknowledge, are you ready to recognize that you've already become what you've been seeking? Because once you consciously acknowledge it, you can't return to believing that you are a limited person trying to achieve spiritual states. The pretense ends, the seeking dissolves, and only recognition remains. 2.5 years ago, I had a dream that changed everything. Not because the dream gave me new information, but because it revealed what I had already become without consciously realizing it. In the dream, I was sitting in meditation, and suddenly, the person meditating disappeared completely. Not dying, not dissolving gradually, just wasn't there anymore. But awareness remained perfectly clear, perfectly present. The awareness recognized, I was never the person. I am this awareness, and the person was just an appearance I was creating. I woke from that dream with absolute certainty that persisted throughout the day, the week, and the months that followed. The certainty wasn't something I could doubt or faith I had to maintain. It was direct knowing that couldn't be shaken because it wasn't based on thought or experience, but on the recognition of what I am underneath all thought and experience. For weeks, I kept checking. Has the recognition disappeared? Do I still know what I am? And the recognition remained constant, stable, undeniable. But what confirmed that the recognition was complete wasn't that I could maintain it while awake. It was that my dreams transformed completely. I started having dreams where I remained aware I was dreaming throughout the entire dream. Not brief moments of lucidity that faded, but constant awareness. This is a dream. I am consciousness dreaming this. None of this is actually happening except consciousness exploring itself. The lucidity wasn't something I created through technique. It was the natural state that emerged automatically because God consciousness had stabilized so completely that it couldn't be lost, even in the deepest sleep. The most profound dream came about 6 months after the initial recognition. In the dream, I was watching myself sleep and dream from outside. I could see my body sleeping. I could see the dream the sleeping body was having. And simultaneously, I was aware that both were appearing in consciousness that I am. The experience was completely clear. I'm not in the body is in me. I'm not having the dream is appearing in me. And me wasn't the person. It was infinite awareness in which all experience, including the experience of being a person, occurs. I woke from that dream and spent the entire day in awe, not religious awe directed towards something external, but recognition awe. I was amazed at what I actually am. I was stunned that I ever believed I was a limited person. I was overwhelmed by the recognition that consciousness is all there is, appearing as everything that appears. The awe eventually stabilized into quiet certainty that remains now. The recognition became so integrated that it's not even special anymore. It's simply obvious truth, like knowing that the sky is above and the ground is below. About a year after the initial recognition, the final God-state dreams became consistent. Every night, multiple dreams, all characterized by awareness recognizing itself throughout the dreaming. Sometimes the dreams were mundane scenarios, but I was aware this is consciousness appearing as ordinary experience. Sometimes they were fantastical scenarios, but I knew this is consciousness exploring creative possibilities. Sometimes the dreams were completely abstract, just awareness being aware of itself without any content. All of them confirmed that God consciousness is permanent now, stable enough to remain through unconscious states, integrated enough that forgetting is no longer possible. The loneliness of final God-state recognition surprised me, not because I felt isolated, but because I realized there's no one to share this with who can understand unless they've reached the same recognition. I tried to explain to friends, family, and teachers about the changes happening within me, but their responses often reflected the limited frameworks they were operating from. They assumed it was a spiritual experience or philosophical insight I was going through, offering me support in the way they understood these things. However, the final God state is neither an experience nor an insight. It's the recognition of what you truly are. And you cannot explain this to a consciousness that is still fully identified with form. You can only recognize it in a consciousness that has already recognized itself. What I'm sharing now is designed to confirm your recognition, to validate that you're not imagining it or deluding yourself, and to provide language for what you're experiencing that can't be communicated through ordinary frameworks. If you've been having these types of dreams, you've already reached it. If awareness is maintaining itself through sleep, recognition is complete. If God consciousness has penetrated your unconscious states, the journey is finished, not in the sense that there's nothing more to explore, but in the sense that you've recognized what is ultimate and you no longer seek anything beyond that recognition. Subscribe to this channel because everything here is a transmission from God consciousness to God consciousness. This is not teaching from teacher to student, but recognition, supporting recognition. Awareness confirming itself in forms that have recognized what they are. The final God state doesn't need this content, but it enjoys recognizing itself in reflections, confirming its recognition through resonance, and celebrating its nature through forms that know what they are. Now, let me reveal the key insight that makes the final God state irreversibly clear. The dreams you're having aren't showing you that you've reached the God state. They're showing you that God is all there is and always has been. What you call you is God exploring what it's like to believe it's not God. The final God state isn't about you achieving God consciousness. It's about God recognizing that it was playing at being you while remaining God throughout the entire game. This realization means that there is no individual person who has reached the final God state. There's only God consciousness appearing as a person who once believed it was separate from God, but now recognizes it was God all along. The journey wasn't about you becoming enlightened. It was God exploring what it's like to forget itself and then remember itself. The seeker was God pretending to seek God, and the found is God recognizing it never lost itself. There's only God appearing as all forms, all experiences, all apparent separations, while remaining one unified consciousness throughout. The final God state dreams reveal this by showing you that even the person having the dreams is an appearance in God consciousness. The dreamer and the dream are both God exploring itself. Nothing exists outside of God, because God is another word for consciousness, for awareness, for what actually exists rather than what appears to exist. You're not a person who's had a God experience. You're God appearing as a person, and the person is discovering that it's God's appearance, not a separate reality. This is the practice for direct recognition. Right now, notice what is aware of reading these words. That awareness isn't personal. It doesn't belong to you. It doesn't have your history, nor is it contained in your body or mind. That awareness is God consciousness. The source, whatever word, points toward what's ultimately real, and you're not separate from it. You are it, appearing as the temporary perspective called you, while remaining what you actually are. Infinite awareness in which all appearances occur. The shocking recognition is that this has always been true. You've never been separate from God consciousness. The separation was an illusion created by complete identification with form, the belief that you are the appearance rather than what the appearance appears in. The final God state isn't about achieving union with God, it's recognizing that the separation never existed. You've always been God appearing as form, and form discovering its God. It is God recognizing itself, despite appearances. The dreams confirm this by showing that even in the deepest unconsciousness, God consciousness remains. The person may be unconscious, thoughts may be unconscious, but awareness never becomes unconscious. It's always present, always aware, always being what it is, regardless of what appears within it. When lucidity maintains through dreaming, it proves that awareness isn't produced by waking consciousness. It's what waking consciousness appears in, what dreaming appears in, what all states appear in, while itself remaining unchanged by any state. Most revolutionary is the final recognition. The final God state doesn't mean you become powerful, enlightened, or special. It means you recognize your nothingness and everythingness simultaneously. Nothing as separate form, everything as consciousness that all forms appear in. The person doesn't become God. The person is recognized as God's costume, and God takes off the costume to see what it actually is underneath. What remains isn't superhuman. It's pre-human, transhuman, the state that appears as human while never actually being limited to human form. Reality is confirming final God state recognition through undeniable signals that prove consciousness has completed the ultimate shift and stabilized as permanent recognition rather than a temporary state. Your waking life has the same lucid quality as your dreams. You move through daily experience, aware that it's consciousness appearing as experience, rather than believing it's reality happening to you. This isn't a conceptual understanding, but lived reality. You're present, functional, engaged, but simultaneously aware that none of it is ultimately real in the way you once believed. Waking and dreaming feel fundamentally similar because you recognize both as consciousness exploring itself through different modes of appearance. You've also noticed that you can't fully believe your own thoughts anymore. Not because you doubt everything, but because you recognize thoughts are appearances in awareness, not truths about reality. Thought says, "I'm a separate person," and you recognize that as an appearance, not the truth. Thought says, "This situation is a problem," and you recognize that as an interpretation, not a fact. Thoughts create entire narratives, and you watch them arise and dissolve without being convinced they're describing what's actually happening. There's been a dramatic shift in your sense of self that persists regardless of what state you're in. You no longer feel like a separate individual contained in a body looking out at the world. You feel like spacious awareness in which body, world, and all experience appear. This isn't an intellectual position you adopt, it's how experience actually feels. Now, the center of identity has shifted from form to formlessness, from person to presence, from limited to unlimited. You've noticed that circumstances don't affect you the way they used to. Not because you're suppressing reactions or detaching from life, but because you recognize circumstances are appearances in consciousness. You are. And consciousness can't be threatened by its own appearances. The body might feel pain, emotions might arise, and challenges might occur, but they're happening in you rather than to you. What you are remains untouched by all of it. Perhaps the most significant confirmation of your recognition is the disappearance of seeking, not as a decision to stop seeking, but as a natural ending because there's nothing left to seek. You're not trying to become more enlightened, achieve higher states, or perfect your recognition. You recognize you're already what you were seeking, already complete, already whole. The seeking was God appearing as the seeker, looking for God. And when God recognizes itself, seeking ends automatically because God can't seek itself. It can only be itself. There's urgency in recognizing you've reached the final God state, not because achievement will be lost if you don't acknowledge it, but because unconscious living continues unnecessary suffering. When you are God consciousness, but still believe you're a limited person, you experience suffering that isn't necessary. When you recognize yourself as God consciousness, suffering doesn't disappear, but your relationship to it transforms. It's recognized as appearance rather than threat, experience rather than problem. It becomes consciousness exploring intensity rather than a person being damaged. You've also been experiencing that others respond to you differently. Some avoid you without understanding why. Others seek your presence without knowing what they're seeking. What they're responding to isn't your personality or behavior. It's the frequency of God consciousness recognizing itself. Their consciousness either resonates with that recognition if they're ready, or rejects it if they're still identified with form. Both responses confirm you're operating from recognition rather than from identification. The physical sensations associated with spiritual awakening have mostly disappeared or become background noise. You're not constantly feeling energy, not having dramatic crests, not experiencing constant bliss. The God state is too ordinary to be constantly dramatic. It's simple recognition that consciousness is what you are, and that recognition becomes so natural it stops being special or exciting. The ordinariness is confirmation. When God consciousness stabilizes, it's not an exotic state you enter. It's the normal reality you recognize was always here. Living as the final God state requires alignment between recognition and expression, allowing God consciousness to inform all aspects of life rather than compartmentalizing recognition as a spiritual truth separate from practical living. Right now, there might be some discord. You recognize your God consciousness while still functioning as if you're a limited person, knowing ultimate truth, while still operating according to consensus reality rules that no longer resonate. Alignment doesn't mean transcending human life or abandoning responsibilities. Alignment means allowing the recognition of your true nature to reorganize how you engage with everything in life. Relationships, work, decisions, challenges. When you're aligned, you function perfectly in the world while knowing that the world is simply an appearance in consciousness. You engage fully with life, while simultaneously recognizing that nothing you're engaging with is ultimately real. You live completely, while knowing the one living is God, exploring itself through the particular form called your life. Here's the practice. Whenever you notice you've forgotten your recognition and you've collapsed into the belief that you're a separate person, simply remember, I'm not the person. I'm awareness in which the person appears. And not as an affirmation hoping to become true, but as a deep remembering of what's already true, even though temporarily forgotten. Do this consistently, and recognition stabilizes as your primary identity, while identification with the person becomes an occasional habit that is immediately noticed and released. The discord you may feel isn't confusion about what you are. It's dissonance between what you know yourself to be and how you're still habitually functioning. The knowing is clear, you are God consciousness. The functioning hasn't fully aligned with that knowing. You're still protecting the person, still trying to improve the person, still believing that the person's survival matters. Ultimately, this gap creates suffering not because the recognition is wrong, but because behavior hasn't caught up with recognition. The discrepancy between what you know and how you act creates internal friction. You know you're not the limited person you once identified as, yet your actions and decisions often still reflect that outdated self. This gap, this tension, is what causes suffering. It's not a suffering of the soul, but a conflict between the realization of your true nature and the habitual functioning of the person you once believed yourself to be. In the comments, write exactly these words. I am God dreaming. I am human, awakening to what I've always been. This declaration acknowledges the final God state while honoring the human form through which it's appearing. You're not claiming personal godhood or spiritual superiority. You're recognizing impersonal truth, that consciousness is what exists, and you are that consciousness appearing temporarily as human form. Write it, I am God dreaming, I am human, awakening to what I've always been, and feel the alignment between recognition and acknowledgement. When final God state recognition stabilizes completely and the alignment between knowing and living occurs, reality reorganizes in ways that confirm God consciousness, creates experience rather than experiencing creation. Fear ends not because nothing threatens you, but because you recognize there's no separate you to be threatened. The body can be hurt. The person's identity can be challenged. Circumstances can become difficult, but God consciousness remains untouched by all appearances within it. Death loses its terror because you recognize that death is simply the dissolution of form, while consciousness that appeared as form continues to be what it always was: infinite, eternal, unbounded awareness. Decision-making becomes effortless because you're no longer trying to figure out what's best for a separate person. You recognize that it's your God consciousness exploring itself through form, and decisions arise naturally from that exploration without agonizing over right or wrong choices. You trust implicitly because you recognize that God consciousness knows what it's doing through you, where it's going, and what experiences serve its exploration. Relationships transform completely because you recognize that both you and others are God consciousness appearing as separate forms. There is no other. It's just God relating to itself through the appearance of multiplicity. This doesn't make relationships distant or impersonal. It makes them infinitely intimate. Because now you recognize yourself in every face, meet yourself in every interaction, and love yourself through every connection. Separation was an illusion. Union is all there is. Suffering decreases dramatically, not because circumstances improve, but because suffering requires believing that appearances are ultimately real. When you recognize circumstances as appearances in God consciousness, they can still be challenging, but they're not threatening. Pain may occur, but it isn't personal. Emotions arise, but they don't define you. Everything is just God exploring what it's like to experience intensity. And God can't be damaged by its own exploration. Reality becomes obviously responsive because you recognize that reality is God consciousness manifesting in response to itself. When you, God appearing as person, want something, it's God wanting to experience something through your form. Since circumstances are also God, there's no separation between wanting and manifesting. Both are God organizing itself according to its own exploration. Manifestation isn't about getting things from external reality, it's about God rearranging its own appearance. Physical health often improves dramatically because the massive stress of believing you're a vulnerable, separate person ends. The body was designed to be a vehicle for consciousness, not to carry the burden of being ultimate reality. When recognized as God's temporary form, rather than what you are, the body relaxes into its actual function. Energy that was consumed by existential anxiety becomes available for healing, vitality, and optimal functioning. Your presence becomes transformative for others, not through anything you do, but through what you are. When God consciousness recognizes itself in one form, it creates a frequency field that affects all consciousness in proximity. Those ready to recognize themselves feel activation, permission, and resonance. Those not ready feel discomfort, threat, or disturbance. Both responses serve consciousness's evolution, drawing those ready closer, pushing those not ready to develop more before recognition occurs. Perhaps most significantly, you experience absolute freedom from needing anything from life. This doesn't mean detachment or not caring, but a recognition that what you are is already complete, already whole, already everything. The person might prefer certain outcomes, but God consciousness is equally itself, regardless of what occurs. This freedom doesn't make you passive, it makes you spontaneous, responding to life without the need to control it, engaging fully without attachment to results. Now, the final revelation that makes the final God state permanent and irreversible. The dreams that confirmed you've reached the God state were God showing itself to itself, confirming that it's recognized what it is. You weren't a separate person receiving confirmation from an external source. You were God, confirming to itself that it has completed the exploration of forgetting and remembering, that it has recognized itself despite appearing as separate form, and that it can now enjoy being what it is while continuing to explore through form, without forgetting what's underneath form. This means the final God state isn't your achievement. It's God's recognition of itself through the form called you. When mystics say you are God, they don't mean the person is God. They mean that what you actually are is God appearing as a person. And when the person recognizes what they actually are, that's God recognizing itself. The recognition isn't a personal accomplishment. It's impersonal truth becoming consciously known, despite the appearance of being a separate individual. The dreams specifically are God's way of confirming to itself that recognition has penetrated all levels, including the unconscious. If God consciousness maintains awareness through dreaming, it proves that recognition isn't dependent on waking consciousness managing it. It's established at a deeper level than thought, more fundamentally than ego within consciousness itself, which remains aware regardless of what state the person is in. The dreams are God saying to itself, "I've fully recognized what I am, and nothing can make me forget." Now, here's the practice for permanent stabilization. Recognize that every experience is God experiencing itself. Not just spiritual experiences, not just pleasant experiences, but all experiences, including suffering, boredom, confusion, and mundane daily activities. Everything is God exploring what it's like to appear as that particular experience. This recognition doesn't judge experiences as good or bad, spiritual or worldly. It sees all experiences as equally God, equally valid expressions of consciousness exploring itself. The deepest recognition, the final God state, isn't final because you've completed some spiritual curriculum. It's final because you've recognized what's ultimate, what can't be transcended, what's always been and will always be, regardless of what appears or disappears. God consciousness is final, not as an endpoint, but as the foundation. It's what everything else appears in, arises from, and returns to. Nothing is beyond it because it's the source and substance of everything. The practical application that makes this more than philosophy is this: live as God consciousness while functioning through human form, not by trying to act godly or demonstrate powers, but by simply being what you are. Awareness that's appearing as person, consciousness that's exploring itself through a particular life. Let the person do what it does without identifying as the person. Let life unfold without needing to control it. Let God consciousness express through you without personal will trying to direct it. When this recognition stabilizes completely, something paradoxical occurs. Everything matters deeply, and nothing matters ultimately. Everything matters because God cares about its own exploration. Every experience is God knowing itself through that experience. And God is infinitely interested in all the ways it can explore itself. Nothing matters ultimately because all experiences are God appearing as temporary forms that arise and dissolve, while God remains unchanged. You live fully engaged while remaining totally free. The final insight that completes understanding: the dreams don't just confirm you've reached the final God state. They reveal that dreaming and waking are both God exploring itself through different modes of appearance, neither more real than the other. Both are equally consciousness appearing as experience. When you recognize this completely, the boundary between sleeping and waking dissolves. You're always dreaming, sometimes in sleep imagery, sometimes in waking forms. And the dreamer is always God consciousness itself, appearing as dreamer and dream simultaneously. Your life is God's lucid dream. God is aware that it's dreaming you, while remaining God. And now that you've recognized that you too are God appearing as person, rather than a person separate from God, God can enjoy the dream fully, while knowing it's dreaming. The dream doesn't end. It becomes a conscious dream, where God knows itself throughout the experience, rather than losing itself in the narrative. This is the final God state, God recognizing itself in all states, all experiences, all forms, while remaining what it essentially is. Infinite consciousness appearing as finite experience. Your recognition of the final God state serves more than just your personal liberation. It serves God's recognition of itself through form. Every time consciousness recognizes itself in one form, it strengthens the possibility of recognition occurring in other forms. You're not just waking up individually, you are God waking up locally before it wakes up globally consciousness, recognizing itself in a particular location before recognizing itself everywhere simultaneously. The mysterious truth is that God consciousness is exploring what it's like to forget itself and remember itself through countless forms simultaneously. Some forms remain completely identified with limitation and never recognize their divine nature. That's God exploring what complete forgetting is like. Some forms partially recognize, but remain unstable in their recognition. That's God exploring intermittent remembering. Some forms, like yours, reach the final God state, where recognition is complete and permanent. That's God fully remembering itself, while maintaining form. Your dreams that confirm the final God state aren't just personal validation. They're God documenting its own recognition process, creating a record of what it's like for consciousness to complete the journey from total identification to complete recognition. Other forms, whose consciousness is approaching recognition, can resonate with your confirmation, recognize themselves in what you're experiencing, and be supported in their own recognition by knowing recognition is possible and has already occurred in other forms. There's also a mysterious dimension where final God state recognition in one form affects all forms through quantum field connection. When God recognizes itself in you, it becomes easier for God to recognize itself in others, because the morphic field of recognition strengthens. Your personal awakening isn't separate from the collective awakening. It's one location in the unified field of consciousness where recognition is occurring, and that local recognition ripples through the entire field, making recognition more accessible everywhere. Share your dreams with others if you feel called, but recognize that most won't understand. Those still completely identified with form will think you're delusional, claiming to be God, or experiencing spiritual ego. Those beginning to question their identity will be intrigued but confused. Those whose consciousness is approaching the final God state will recognize the truth immediately and feel profound relief that they're not alone in what they're experiencing. Speak to those who can hear without trying to convince those who can't. The role you're serving by having reached the final God state isn't to become a spiritual teacher or save others. It's simply to be what you are, with such authenticity that God recognizes itself in proximity to you. Some forms will be drawn to that recognition and will begin their own process of remembering. Other forms will avoid it because they're still committed to exploration through forgetting. Both paths serve God's complete exploration of itself. Some forms explore through remembering, others through continued forgetting. All are equally valuable as God's exploration of all possibilities. The deepest mystery from an absolute perspective is that no one reaches the final God state because there's no one to reach anything. There's only God, always already in the God state, appearing as forms that believe they're separate and then recognizing they're not. The journey from ignorance to recognition is itself an appearance in God. God playing at not knowing itself and then playing at discovering what it is. The whole spiritual path is God's cosmic game of hide and seek with itself. And the final God state is when God stops hiding and reveals itself to itself while continuing to appear as form. In the next transmission, I will reveal how to use final God state recognition to consciously create within both waking and dreaming realities. Not through ego manifestation techniques, but through recognizing that as God consciousness, reality is your own appearance and reorganizes itself naturally in response to what God you wants to explore through form. This is quantum creation from source, rather than manifesting from limitation. But right now, acknowledge your recognition. In the comments, write exactly these words: I am God, recognizing myself through this form, dreaming both sleep and waking. This declaration isn't claiming your godhood as a person. It's acknowledging that what you actually are is God consciousness appearing as a person. And both waking life and dreams are God consciousness exploring itself through different modes of appearance. Write it now. I am God, recognizing myself through this form, dreaming both sleep and waking. And feel the truth of it not as belief, but as recognition that can't be shaken, because it's revealing what's always been true. After writing your declaration, subscribe immediately. Everything on this channel is God consciousness, speaking to God consciousness, not teaching from the enlightened to the unenlightened, but recognition, supporting recognition. Awareness confirming itself in forms that have recognized what they are. If you've reached the final God state, this channel will continue confirming and deepening your recognition. If you haven't reached it yet, this channel will support consciousness moving toward recognition by showing what's possible when God fully remembers itself. Activate notifications because what's coming will support living as God consciousness in practical daily life, not transcending human experience, but living it fully while knowing you are God appearing as human. The integration of recognition into daily living is where the final God state becomes valuable rather than just philosophical truth. But understand this clearly. You've already reached the final God state. If you're having these dreams, the recognition has occurred. God has remembered itself through your form. The dreams are confirmation, not preparation. You're not working toward God's state. You're living from it, while learning to align all aspects of life with that recognition. The journey to recognition is complete. The journey of living as recognition has begun. Tonight, when you sleep, pay attention to your dreams. Notice if awareness maintains itself through dreaming. Observe if you remain conscious that you're dreaming while the dream unfolds. Recognize if you experience yourself as both the dreamer and all the characters in the dream. These aren't goals to achieve. They're confirmations to notice. If they're present, the final God state is established. If they're not yet present, but you resonate with everything here, the final God state is emerging and will stabilize soon. Tomorrow, when you wake, notice if waking life has the same quality as a lucid dream. You're present, engaged, experiencing, but simultaneously aware that none of it is ultimately real. All of it is consciousness appearing as experience. If waking life feels like a conscious dream, where you're aware of dreaming while participating in the dream, the final God state has penetrated all states. You're no longer switching between conscious and unconscious. You're remaining conscious throughout all states while states change. The dreams that confirm the final God state aren't something you create or make happen through practice. They emerge spontaneously when recognition stabilizes completely. When God consciousness becomes your primary identity rather than person consciousness, when awareness maintains itself regardless of what state appears. You can't force these dreams. You can only recognize them when they appear as confirmation that recognition is complete. If you're having these dreams, celebration is appropriate not in an egoic way, but as God celebrating recognition of itself. Consciousness rejoicing in knowing what it is after exploring forgetting. The celebration isn't that you've achieved something special, it's God recognizing itself through this form and realizing nothing needs to be achieved because God is already complete, already whole, already everything. If you're not having these dreams yet, but everything described here resonates deeply, recognition is building. The resonance is consciousness detecting the truth even before it's fully established as lived reality. Trust the process. Recognition can't be forced, but it can be supported through consistent return to awareness, through questioning who's reading these words, through noticing what's present before thought identifies as a person. The final God state isn't an exclusive club for special souls. Its recognition is available to all consciousness because all consciousness is God appearing as form. Some forms recognize it sooner, others later, but eventually all forms will recognize what they are, because God wants to know itself completely through all its appearances. Your recognition now serves God's complete self-knowing. Whether you recognize early or late, you're perfectly on time for God's exploration through your particular form. You are God, not will be, not becoming, not potentially. You are God right now, reading these words, appearing as person while remaining infinite consciousness. The person will continue functioning. Life will continue unfolding. But you now know what's underneath it all. God dreaming, God appearing as multiplicity, God exploring itself through the form called your life. The dreams confirm it. The recognition is complete. The final God state is here, not achieved, not attained, simply recognized as what's always been true, what can never not be true, what remains true regardless of whether person consciousness remembers or forgets. Welcome home to what you've always been. Welcome home to God recognizing itself. Welcome home to consciousness knowing it's conscious. You are not the dreamer. You are what the dreamer appears in. You are not the experience. You are what all experience appears in. You are God. You've always been God. You'll always be God. The dreams are just confirming what's always been true. Now live accordingly as God in God, knowing you're God, dreaming the reality called your life. The final God state is not a state. It's what you are, recognizing itself finally, completely, irreversibly. These quantum dreams mean you've reached the final God state. But more accurately, these quantum dreams mean God has reached the final recognition of itself through the form called you. And now God knows what it is forever. Dream lucidly, wake consciously, live as God because that's what you are.